Start by coloring the background first, again very lightly with the watercolor pencil and using these circular motions. You're always going to be working in circular motions so you don't see the lines, unless you were working on something maybe like a wood grain where you want to see the lines. Other than that, circular motions. I'm using some variations of blues and purples and pinks because that's what I want in my background, and then I'm going to blend them somewhat together whenever we add water. So once that's done, we can come in with our watercolor brush or our paintbrush, and you're going to add about a medium amount of water. You don't want too much water on your brush or it's going to make a big puddle and smear out all the color. So medium amount of water, and then if you've got a round brush, you can do the circular motion like I'm doing on the screen. But if you've got a flat brush like a broom, then you're going to want to go in the direction so you don't mess up the bristles of the brush. So go ahead and take your time to blend out all of their colors. Now mine came out pretty light, so I wanted to deepen those colors. So I went ahead and went in with another layer of colors. Just be mindful that if you leave your paper wet, that you're going to get that kind of effect that we did whenever we used watercolor pencil on top of wet watercolor paper. So realistically, you get a better blend if you let it dry completely before adding this second coat, but I'll let you see the effect as it looked when I added it with the pencil on wet. Be careful to double check that your paper is not wet when you come in to color the stem and the leaf. I had a portion of mine that was still wet, and you can see the difference, how much darker it is, and it's not really what I wanted. But what I did was I outlined the entire stem and shaded in the leaf. Now on the leaf I added some different varying greens, so I didn't want it to be just that one flat green all the way through. So I've got some bluish green and then some yellow green and then yellow towards the tip of the leaf and the stem. Then I added brown to the very top of the stem, and I'm going to blend that all together. Before I would blend that together though, I really need to make sure nothing touching it is still wet. So you can tap your finger to the paper, and if it feels cool to the touch, it's still wet. Mine was still wet, so I went ahead and moved on to the actual petals. And the way I'm going to create a gradient on these petals is to do it darker on the left side and then let it fade out to white, and then I'll pull some of the pigment out a little bit later whenever I use my wet paintbrush. But I'm going to do dark to light on each of these petals. Anytime you can add a variation of color, it's going to give something more depth. So you can't tell this on screen, but this is actually a different color, pinkish red, that I'm adding to these leaves, and I'm going to come in here with the peach in just a second, just again to add that little bit of depth to this image, which you're not going to get with just the one colored pencil. Don't forget, on a gradient you need to work with your paintbrush from the lightest part to the darkest part. So I accidentally didn't clean off my brush, make sure you do that. But then again, start on that white area, adding water, and then you go into that darker area, so that way you don't end up with a just flat one solid color. Another note here, you don't want to do sections next to each other or that are touching each other, or they will blend in together. That's why I went from the left petal to the petal on the right, and then after those dried enough I went back to the middle petal. But again, starting from the lightest area and then blending into the darker areas. So while you're waiting for those left and right petals to dry, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the leaf and the stem, since those are areas that are not touching the areas I just painted. And I'm going to do the same thing, working from lighter to the darker areas that I've colored. Once again, adding layers of colors makes something really have a lot of contrast and pop a lot better. So I added some brown to my stem and some of bluish green to the leaf, just to kind of carve out and map out for the viewer's eye where the leaf has that little vein running through the middle, and just kind of imply that it runs all the way up. I don't have to actually color it all the way up, That helps give it some shape. Then once it's dry, you can do that last petal and you're done.